Alright, today we're going to do a fantasy book recommendation video, and similar to the sci-fi recommendation video that I posted last month, a couple weeks ago, what is time, I have chosen kind of a theme-ish sort of thing. These books all relate to each other in my brain somehow, on a gradient, and the gradient is kind of dark fairy tale-esque. Okay? Mainly because I'm hoping that in the comments you guys will see this list and recommend me things to read, because these are some of my favorite books of all time, and that's primarily because of the dark fairy tale qualities or the atmosphere while I'm reading them. I need more books like this in my life. On my TBR right now, I don't have enough of these. So I think I have like 10-ish that we're going to talk about, and I kind of am going to order it in sort of a way. And yeah, we can discuss in the comments or my Discord any recommendations you have. And let's get into it. We're going to start with retellings. So fairy tale retellings, that's primarily what they bring to the table. This is like a fairly popular situation. These are easier to find. These are not the things that I'm necessarily looking for, but these are the retellings that like scratch that itch for me, if that makes sense. The first one we'll talk about is Blanca y Roja, or basically anything by Anna Marie McLemore. I've read two. I've read Dark and Deep as Red and Blanca y Roja. I think Blanca y Roja fits on this list better. And this is, I think, a retelling of a fairy tale I don't know very well, but it's definitely like feels like a fairy tale retelling. You have two sisters and there's a curse, and one of them's gonna have to become a swan, and then they run into these two boys and one of them's supposed to save them. It's like the whole prince situation. Like, it definitely has the framework of a fairy tale, but it's also just very dark because it has a lot of contemporary real world issues like laced into it. Wonderful discussions on friendship and gender identity and sexual orientation, sibling relationships. Like how Anna Marie McLemore writes sibling relationships and just relationships in general is one of my favorite things. But also the atmosphere of this and her writing style really like puts me into the mindset of I'm reading a retelling. It is dark. It is unsettling. I'm enjoying my time. Like, so that's definitely like the lighter side of it all, but it definitely still fits that vibe for me. Another one that's kind of similar, and I know this is very contentious on BookTube, but I really like this story. I've read it twice, and that's Uprooted by Naomi Novik. It is my favorite Naomi Novik, hands down. I've read part of Temeraire and DNF'd the series, and I've read Spinning Silver, but didn't really like it that much. I liked it, but I didn't love it. And Uprooted's the one I really like because it starts off kind of following your Beauty and the Beast sort of retelling-ish, like similar to that. But then it really does become twisty and dark. Like this forest in Uprooted is the most unsettling thing ever. And I love the forest and what it does to people and how we maneuver that and how our main character's figuring out her position. So I think this is a darker retelling, but it also still has a lot of tropes that I like. I know a lot of people don't like the romance in this. I actually didn't mind it, but also I found it very engaging when I was reading it. I read it in like 2 days, so that's another thing. A lot of these I tend to read very quickly. Another retelling, I'm putting this here because I do think it counts, and that's the short story collection, The Last Wish, the first Witcher short story collection. I did not know this when I went into it, but these are all just little dark twistings of, you know, Brothers Grimm's fairy tales, and it's really cool. I really like it. Like, that's what I love about the two first short story collections, is it takes these fairy tales and it's just in this kind of grimmer, dark setting, and it's with this monster hunter, and I really, really liked it. Like, I ate that up. It's when we deviated from that that the Witcher series was not as good for me. And now these next two, I think, kind of put me into the more like horror-ish, darker side of this type of list that I've been putting together. And the first one's The Siren Queen by Niveau. This is golden age of Hollywood making deals with these producers to be part of these film studios. Basically, they are actual monsters. You are actually doing blood deals. It is extremely dark and creepy, but I loved it. It definitely just had the vibes and atmosphere and dreamlike quality of a fairy tale. I wouldn't say it's a fairy tale, and that's why, you know, I don't even know if it's really a retelling. It just kind of transitions me into the horror. And a similar one that I think is just more horror but could be in the retelling list is The Changeling by Victor Laval. I love The Changeling by Victor Laval. I can't remember the exact, it's not a fairy tale, but it's like, there is a children's tale that this is based off of, and I cannot remember. And obviously changelings are things. They're in folklore. And I really, really liked this. Like a lot of horror things, I don't want to talk about it too much because I think sometimes the fun part is like, what's happening? But our main character and his wife have a kid, and the changeling is a myth of your kid being replaced by a fae creature. And so we're exploring that type of theme here. It's fantastic. It's also set in New York City, and I think really incorporates the vibes of New York City really well. I really enjoyed it, and it reminded me of how I felt watching the movie Pan's Labyrinth, which is one of my favorite, like, dark adult fairy tale movies ever, with, like, horror aesthetics, but it's not, like, quite, like, terrifying horror. I don't read a lot of horror, so I don't know how to, like, correctly differentiate them between each other, but that's why I have it here. And now we're going, like, straight more into, like, there are a lot more horror-ish vibes, although I guess the more intermediate one would be Nettle and Bone, which is probably why I'm making this list, is Nettle and Bone. I want more Nettle and Bone in my life, okay? This actually reminded me more of the movie Stardust, which is not like a dark fairy tale, but it is an adult fairy tale. But it also has some pretty dark and horrific imagery and themes. Like, the whole reason these characters are going on this quest and doing this thing is because Mara's sister is trapped into an abusive marriage. So, like, it's got some really dark real-world connotations there, and then the character herself has to do these really difficult trials to get the stuff that she needs to accomplish this task, and so at times it's pretty dark and can be a little gruesome, but also it was very, like, fairy tale, whimsical, banter like Stardust. So I loved that combination to no end. It was amazing. I have talked about Nettle and Bone a lot on my channel recently, and it's because I love it. And like I said, it's probably the reason I made this list. Another one that I think has more horror elements-ish, and that's why it's, like, darker, and that's the Winter Night trilogy. And I know a lot of people don't talk about this with that in mind, and I think it's primarily the first book that has most of the horror vibes to it, but it's way darker than I think you expect when you pick it up. I mean, not only are you dealing with some heavy themes of the patriarchy and women, and, like, also the displacement of older religions for newer ones coming in. Like, there's a lot of heavy stuff going on in this series, but also there are terrifying monsters at night, and it's very cold, and it's winter, and it's dark, and all of those things can just be a little unsettling, and I think that's why The Bear and the Nightingale was my favorite on reread, is it had that. So specifically The Bear and the Nightingale is what I have on this list, although all of them have these, like, elements throughout, but the first book is the one where I'm like, this is creepy. Like, this is, like, my skin is tingling, and I really, really enjoyed it. And the last one I have for this is the darkest thing on my list, like, actually, like, look at content warnings to figure out if you're okay with what's in it, and that's Temper by Nikki Drayden. I really liked this. It is a great winter read because it actually takes place around the winter solstice. And similarly to Winter Night, you know, you have a lot of the it's winter, so things are kind of creepy. But our main character, like, runs into some issues with a god and maybe a possession. And there's a lot that happens from there. I think I'm going to stop by just saying there's a possession involved because this book literally has so many twists and turns, and it's very, very dark. But I really liked it. It's like a very fun, dark fantasy in ways that, like, I'm not used to. It's not like, you know, grim dark and there are battles and that's why it's dark. Like, no, it's just, like, really creepy and unsettling. And the last two I want to talk about are not, like, horror, and they're not retellings, but they kind of make me think about this genre because there's royalty, and whenever I read fairy tales, I think of royalty. And so this first one's Robin Hobb's The Willful Princess and the Piebald Prince. This is so cozy in its writing and so heart-wrenching. It is incredibly dark and emotional. I mean, it's Robin Hobb. If you've heard of Robin Hobb on the internet, you know that this is kind of what she brings to the table, and this is no exception. In this story, you kind of have two stories that are connected in one, and yeah, you basically are hearing someone account this moment in history in the Six Duchies, and you can read this first in the entire Realm of the Elderlings. It is a early prequel, and it basically lets you know why certain magic systems are treated the way they are. But I read it before Tawny Man, which has been great for me. But you could for sure just read this and be like, do I like Robin Hobb based off this story? And we are following in the first half this willful princess and the decisions she's made and the fallout of that. And in the second half, we see this piebald prince and the decisions he's made. And like, you want everything to be okay. And the writing is so... I have yet to figure out how to describe Robin Hobb's writing, but it's so easy to read, but yet is not light. It's a dense, accessible writing style. I don't understand how to describe it, but it definitely fits the vibes of this list in my head. And then the second one is The Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nivo. Seems like Nivo scratches this itch for me since she's made it on this list twice. But this is also the story, like, of this person in this kingdom who was a empress, and it's a sadder tale. It's darker, it's more somber, and you're hearing it told from her handmaiden to this person who collects stories. and I really liked it, but it wasn't like this light, fluffy tale. But it still had that feeling of I'm being told a story, which is also kind of part of that whole fairy tale situation, I think. But then again, who knows if this list makes any sense. When I put this list together, these books all made sense to me. They all had a similarness to them, but I'm horrible at genres and describing things in my head that way. I just kind of categorize them. But based off these books, what recommendations do you guys have for me? If you just want to leave an emoji, the last one we talked about, we had a lot of royalty. Let's do a crown as the emoji. If you just want me to know you're here, let me know any thoughts you have on these books, if you have read them, spoiler free, of course. And like if you liked it, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.